Ayan, recording na tayo, no? Auditor's report continuation. Ayan. So ito yung emphasis of matters paragraph and key audit matters, pati yung other matter paragraph. Kasama siya dun sa discussion natin last time, no? Dito, dun tayo natapos. Okay, so itutuloy lang natin yan. Okay. Ayan. San ba nilalagay yung emphasis of matter paragraphs and other matter paragraphs? Ayan. The placement depends on the nature of the information to be communicated and the auditor's judgment as to the relative significance of such information to intended users. So, ibig sabihin, yung pwesto kung saan nilalagay yung emphasis of matter paragraph and yung other matter paragraph, depende sa judgment pa rin. Okay. Judgment as to the relative significance, okay, ng information. Ito, yung emphasis of matter paragraph, if it relates to the applicable financial reporting framework where the auditor determines that the financial reporting framework prescribed would otherwise be unacceptable, the auditor may consider it necessary to place the paragraph immediately following the basis of opinion. Okay, sana naalala mo pa yung parts dito, no, ng audit report. Ayan. Immediately after daw ng basis for opinion. Okay. Then when a key audit matter section is presented in the auditor's report, an emphasis of matter paragraph may be presented either directly before or after the key audit matter section. So ito. Either daw before or after. Yan. Then other matter paragraphs. When a key audit matter section is presented in the report, and other matter paragraph is also considered necessary, the auditor may add further context to the heading other matter. Okay, when an OMP is included to draw users' attention to a matter relating to other reporting responsibilities, the paragraph may be included in the report on other legal and regulatory requirements section. And when relevant to all the auditor's responsibilities or users' understanding of the report, the OMP o yung other matter paragraph may be included as a separate section following report on the audit of FS. Ayan. Okay. So itong parts nito, kung hindi mo nare-recall, no, balikan mo yung lecture natin last time. Okay. Ayan. So yun lang naman yung naiwan dito sa emphasis of matter and other matter paragraph. Ayan. Next natin, wag muna dito, no? Wag muna itong going concern considerations. Balikan muna natin yung types ng modified opinion. Ito na-discuss na natin way before pa, no? Babalikan lang natin ngayon. So, alam mo, no, na yung clean opinion, ang tawag doon, unmodified opinion. Okay? Unmodified, unqualified opinion, ganyan. Okay. Then, may tinatawag tayong modified opinion. And kailan ba nagkakaroon ng modified opinion? Ayan. The auditor shall modify the opinion in the auditor's report when, una, auditor concludes that based on audit evidence obtained, financial statements as a whole are not free from material misstatement. Pangalawa, auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence o yung merong scope limitation. Hindi siya nakapag-obtain ng sufficient appropriate evidence. So, yun yung two reasons kung bakit nagkaroon ng modification sa opinion. And ano-ano yung tatlong klase ng modified opinion. Ayan. 3 types of modified opinion: qualified, adverse, and disclaimer. Babalikan lang natin, no? Decision as to what type of opinion is appropriate depends upon, una, nature of the matter giving rise to the modification. Okay, ito nga yun, no? And the auditor's judgment about the pervasiveness. Para mas madaling intindihan, balikan natin yung table, no? Ito din drawing natin dati. Kung naalala mo pa, very good. Pero kung hindi, ayan. Okay. Diyan makikita mo yung dahilan kung bakit magmo-modify ng opinion. Una, yung misstatements. Kapag material but not pervasive, qualified opinion lang. Okay, sasabihin lang dun sa report, presented fairly in all material respects except for ganyan. So may qualification. Ganon kapag yung misstatement ay material but not pervasive. Paano kung both material na yung misstatement, pervasive pa? Adverse opinion yung ilalagay natin. Yung gagawin natin. Sasabihin natin doon na not presented fairly. Okay? Second reason for the modification is inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence o yung scope limitation nga. Kapag material, yung inability but not pervasive, qualified lang ulit. Okay. Paano kapag material na, pervasive pa, disclaimer o no opinion. So, wala tayong bibigay ng opinion. Kasi nga, hindi tayo makakapag-obtain ng sufficient appropriate evidence. So, anong magiging basis mo for that opinion? Yan. Impossibility to form an opinion due to potential interaction of uncertainties and possible cumulative effect on the financial statements. Disclaimer of opinion. Okay. Ayan, tuloy lang natin dito. Inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence, tinatawag ng scope limitation. And when a limitation in terms is such that the auditor believes the need to express disclaimer of opinion exists, the auditor would ordinarily not accept such engagement. Okay, unless required by statute. A statutory auditor would not accept such audit engagement when the limitation infringes on the auditor's statutory duties. If after accepting, the auditor becomes aware that management has imposed a scope limitation that the auditor considers likely to result in the need to express a qualified opinion, the auditor shall request the management to remove the limitation. If it refuses, the auditor shall communicate the matter to those charged with governance, unless they are involved in managing the entity, and determine whether it is possible to perform alternative procedures. Ayan, napag-usapan na natin before. Binabalikan lang natin. Then ito, misstatements. Ayan. Uncorrected material misstatements. Misstatement is a difference between the amount, classification, presentation, or disclosure of a reported financial statement item and the amount, classification, presentation, or disclosure that is required for the item to be in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. So ito, it may arise in relation to, itong table na to, basahin mo na lang on your own. Okay. Tara, punta tayo ngayon dito sa going concern considerations. Ito, napag-usapan na rin natin, no? Yung going concern. So dito meron lang table, no, naka-present sa inyo. Management's use of going concern is appropriate but material uncertainty exists. Anong gagawin? Disclose the principal events or conditions that may cast significant doubt and disclose clearly that there is material uncertainty related to events. Okay. The next, events or conditions identified may cast doubt on entity's ability to continue as a going concern, but no material uncertainty exists. Gagawin, evaluate whether financial statements provide adequate disclosure about these events or conditions. So dito parang ano lang, no, nakasummarize lang yung mga napag-usapan na natin before. Yan. Pangatlo, FS have been prepared using going concern basis, but use of such is inappropriate. So, inappropriate use daw ng going concern basis of accounting. Auditor must express an adverse opinion. Ito. Next, adequate disclosure about material uncertainty is made. Ang gagawin na action? Auditor must express an unmodified opinion. Okay, clean opinion, pero merong separate section. May heading na material uncertainty related to going concern. Okay, kasi nga may disclosure naman. So yung opinion natin, hindi na natin i-modify pero lang magdadagdag lang tayo ng material uncertainty related to going concern na section. Ito, adequate disclosure is not made. Auditor must express a qualified opinion. And in the basis for opinion section, state that a material uncertainty exists that may cast significant doubt on entity's ability to continue as a going concern, and that FS do not adequately disclose this matter. Yeah. Last, there is a significant delay in the approval of FS, and auditor believes that such delay could be related to events or conditions relating to the going concern assessment. Gagawin ni auditor, perform additional audit procedures and consider the effect on the auditor's conclusion regarding the existence of material uncertainty. Yan. Okay. Then, dito tayo, no? Comparative information. Yan. Auditor should determine whether the comparatives o yung comparative financial statements comply with all material in all material respects with the financial reporting framework applicable. Ulit-ulit na tayo dyan, no? Then, two broad financial reporting framework for comparative information. Una, corresponding figures. Pangalawa, comparative financial statements. May summarized table dyan, pero may separate discussion naman dito no, na mas uh, detailed. So, ito na lang yung tingnan natin. Corresponding figures. Ito, take note, they are not presented as complete financial statements capable of standing alone, but are an integral part of the current period financial statements. Then auditor's opinion shall not refer to the corresponding figures except when required by PSA 705 o yung modification to the auditor's report. Yun yata yung title niyan. Parang yun yan. PSA 705. Okay. Then ito, if the auditor's report on the prior period included a qualified disclaimer or adverse opinion, and the matter which gave rise to the modification is unresolved, the auditor shall modify the opinion on the current period's financial statements. So ito, yung mga next statements dyan, basahin mo na lang. Okay, next natin is itong comparative financial statements. Yun naman, comparative FS are considered separate financial statements. So kanina yung corresponding figures, hindi siya, no, not complete financial statements. Ito, comparative financial statements are considered separate financial statements. Okay, when comparative financial statements are presented, the auditor's opinion shall refer to each period for which financial statements are presented. And if the auditor's opinion on such prior period financial statement differs from the opinion the auditor previously expressed, auditor shall disclose the substantive reasons for the different opinion in an other matter paragraph. Ayan. Ito, ano yung mga laman itong other matter paragraph? Okay. That the financial statements of the prior period were audited by a predecessor auditor. Then the type of opinion expressed by the predecessor auditor. And if modified yung opinion, reasons for that modified opinion. And syempre, yung date ng report. Ayan, ito pa. Prior period FS are not audited. Auditor shall state in an other matter paragraph that comparative FS are unaudited. This does not relieve auditor of the requirement to obtain evidence that the opening balances do not contain misstatements that materially affect the current period's financial statements. Okay, ito, no, yung opening balances. Napag-usapan na rin natin to, no, dapat tinetest din yung beginning balances, no, o yung tinatawag na TOBB, test of beginning balances. Syempre, kasi yung year-end balances last year, yun yung magiging beginning balances mo ngayon. Kung yung year-end balances last year are unaudited, okay, unaudited, paano mong masasabi na yung current year FS mo is presented fairly on all material respects? So, dapat yung beginning balances natin for this year, 2021, tinetest natin, no? Okay, kaya yung sabi dyan, this does not relieve the auditor of the requirement to obtain evidence that the opening balances do not contain misstatements. Ayan. Next, audits of group financial statements. Objectives of the auditor are determine whether to act as the auditor of the group, communicate clearly with component auditors about the scope and timing of their work, and obtain sufficient appropriate evidence about the financial information of the components and the consolidation process to express an opinion. Ayan. Tapos ito, significant component is a component identified by the group engagement team that is of individual financial significance to the group, and that is likely to include significant risks of material misstatement of the group financial statements. So tandaan mo lang yan. Pag sinabing ganyan, significant component yung tinutukoy. Excuse me. Ayan. Group engagement partner responsible for direction, supervision, and performance of the group audit. Okay. The next natin, using the work of an auditor's expert. Expert. Yan, napag-usapan na rin natin to before. Sige, basahin natin. Auditor has sole responsibility for the audit opinion. Alam mo na yan. And that responsibility is not reduced by the auditor's use of the work of an expert. So, kailan nga lang ba tayo humingi ng tulong ng expert? Kapag merong item sa natin sa audit process natin na hindi natin kaya on our own. Okay, halimbawa kailangan ng estimate ng isang engineer o ano bang expert, yung mga geologists, kung halimbawa ang tinitingnan natin is yung deposits, mineral deposits sa isang lupain. Okay? Yung mga ganyang bagay. Kailangan ng expert. Pero, syempre, yung opinion natin, okay, sa atin lang yun, sa auditor. Okay? And that responsibility is not reduced by the auditor's use of the work of an auditor's expert. Ito, next bullet point, alam mo na rin yan. Evaluate. Okay, auditor shall evaluate whether the expert has necessary competence, capabilities, and objectivity. Ayan. Tapos, if an auditor makes reference to the work of an expert in the auditor's report, because such reference is relevant to an understanding of a modification to the auditor's opinion, auditor shall indicate in the report that such reference does not reduce auditor's responsibility for that opinion. Yan. Auditor should obtain permission of the expert before making such a reference. And if permission is refused, auditor may need to seek legal advice. Ayan. Next, initial audit engagement. Opening balances. So, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, no? Yung test of beginning balances. Opening balances are based upon the closing balances of the prior period. Okay, and reflect the effects of transactions of prior periods and accounting policies applied in the prior period. So, ito, may mga scenario ulit, no? Auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence concerning opening balances. Tandaan mo, no? Unable to obtain evidence daw. So, ano magiging report mo dyan? Qualified or disclaimer. Okay. Depende kung pervasive ba. Okay. Pag nakakalimutan mo yan, balikan mo lang yung table. Dito. Ayan, no? Inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. Dalawa yung pupuntahan. Qualified or disclaimer. Disclaimer kapag pervasive. Pag hindi naman pervasive, qualified lang. Okay? And yung magde-determine kung pervasive ba is auditor's professional judgment. Okay, next, the opening balances contain misstatements. Okay, which could materially affect current period's financial statements. Take note, misstatements. Ano magiging report mo dyan? Qualified or adverse. Nakalimutan mo? Balikan mo yung table. Ayun o. Misstatements. Qualified or adverse yung opinion. Depende kung pervasive. Kapag pervasive, adverse. Okay, yung opinion. Ayan. Current period's accounting policies have not been consistently applied in relation to opening balances, ayan, qualified or adverse. In prior period, auditor gave a modified report, and modification remains relevant and material to the current period. Modify the opinion as appropriate. Okay. Dito tayo, subsequent events. Ayan, yung una, facts discovered after the date of the auditor's report. Okay, ito yung date of auditor's report. Highlight na lang natin kaysa bilugan. Para mas malinis. Ayan. But before the date of FS issuance. Okay, so na-discover yung fact dito sa point na to. Ayun, sa gitna. Ayan ang gagawin natin dyan. Auditor does not have any responsibility to perform procedures or make any inquiry regarding financial statements after the date of the auditor's report. Okay, wala nang responsibility, no? Management has the responsibility to inform the auditor of facts which may affect financial statements during this period. So, si management yung may responsibility na i-inform si auditor. Okay. But when auditor becomes aware of a fact which may materially affect the financial statements, auditor's procedures and report will depend on whether or not management amends the financial statements. So ito, yung dalawang scenario, no? Management amends, isa, management does not amend. Okay, kapag nag-amend si management, ang gagawin, new audit report, new to hindi net, new. New audit report, excuse me, is issued after performance of additional audit procedures. Okay, kasi ang scenario nga dyan, no? Auditor becomes aware of a fact, okay, which may materially affect the FS. And yung gagawin ni auditor's procedures and report will depend on whether management amends the financial statements. So dito nga sa scenario natin, nag-amend ng FS si management. Okay, therefore, dapat lang merong bagong audit report. New audit report is issued after performance of additional audit procedures. So may gagawin pang additional procedures si auditor. Okay, then the new report shall not be dated earlier than the date the amended financial statements are signed. Okay, kasi ayun nga, no, nag-amend ng FS yung ating management. And syempre, pinipirmahan din nila yan. Ay bago nila i-release. Okay, so yung report natin, yung audit report, dapat after no signed amended financial statement. Paano kung ayaw mag-amend ng ating management? Ayan, so ito. Auditor should not release the original report anymore. Auditor shall issue a qualified or adverse opinion and release new report to the entity. Then, if the original report has been released, and auditor should notify persons ultimately responsible for the overall direction of the entity not to issue the FS. Then, if the FS have been subsequently released together with the report, auditor needs to take action to prevent reliance on the auditor's report. Okay, no? Maging hassle, no? So, responsibility pala yon ni auditor, no? Na kapag na-release yung FS na hindi in-amend, no? And merong misstatements, siya pala, no? Responsible siya, no? To prevent the reliance, no, ng users to that auditor's report. Okay. The next natin, ito naman, subsequent event pa rin, pero facts discovered after the FS have been issued. So, dito na siya. Okay, ito yung date of issuance. Dito lang na-discover yung fact. After the FS have been issued, the auditor has no obligation to make any inquiry regarding such FS. But when an auditor becomes aware of a fact which existed at the date of the auditor's report, okay, take note yung fact nag-exist na at the date of auditor's report, and which may have caused the auditor to modify the auditor's report, auditor's procedures will depend on whether or not management revises the FS. Okay. Take note no na na-release na kasi yung FS, so i-revise niya ni management. Okay, dahil nga merong fact no na nag-exist na as of the auditor's report date, no, na dahil pala diyan sa fact na 'yan, magmo-modify sana ng opinion si auditor. Okay. Pero dahil nga na-release na yung FS, bago umaksyon si auditor, tingnan muna niya no, kung willing ba si management na mag-revise ng FS o hindi. Okay. And ito yung dalawang scenario. Management revises. Anong gagawin ni auditor? Carry out the audit procedures necessary in the circumstances. So may trabaho pa siya ulit, no? Magpo-procedure pa ulit si auditor. Next, review steps taken by management to ensure that anyone in receipt of the previously issued FS is informed of this situation. Kasi take note, na-release na yung FS, na-issue na, baka meron nang gumamit, no? May user na magre-rely dyan. Okay, kaya dapat na-inform. Okay? Kung sino man yung mga maaaring gumamit na nung FS na yon. Okay, inform lang siya na, uy, may papalitan kami dyan. Ganyan. Next, the responsibility no, na action ni auditor. Issue a new report on the revised FS with emphasis of matter paragraph. And ayan, new report shall not be dated earlier than the date the revised FS are signed or approved. Paano naman kapag hindi nag-revise yung ating management? Yeah. Notify persons ultimately responsible for the overall direction of the entity. Action will depend on auditor's legal rights and obligations and recommendations of lawyers. Okay. Ayan. Ayan. Yun yung sa subsequent events. Okay. Next natin, dual dated audit report. Ayan, pero baka may question ka pala. Unmute ka lang bago tayo magtuloy dito. Unmute ka lang kung may question ka. Okay, mukhang wala namang tanong, no? Tara, tuloy natin dito. Dual dated audit report. Yan, basahin natin. Dual dating supplements the original audit report date with a current date limited specifically to the note describing the subsequent event. So, kailan ba kasi nagdo-dual date? Okay. Kapag merong isang specific item do sa FS na may kailangan ng disclosure and yung disclosure na yon is naapektuhan ng subsequent event. Okay, na kakailanganan ng panibagong testing. Okay? Kasi, di ba merong audit report, may date yung audit report natin as a whole ng FS. Okay. Kaya naging dual report, dual dated yung audit report natin. Kasi, bukod dito sa overall na date na yan, meron pang exceptions. Sabihin na, except for note, let's say, note 4 ng financial statements. So, may sarili siyang audit report na date. Okay. Kasi, hindi nasakop nitong overall date yung subsequent event na naka-apekto dun sa note 4. Okay. Kasi hindi naman pwedeng sabihin na yung audit report natin, hindi niya sinasakop yung note, yung isang specific note. Kasi syempre, kailangan buong FS bigyan ng opinion. Okay, sige, basahin natin. Dual dating supplements the original audit report date, okay, with the current date limited specifically to the note describing the subsequent event. When auditor uses dual dating, the auditor limits his or her responsibility for subsequent events to the specific event referred to in the note. Okay. If the auditor becomes aware after completion of fieldwork but before issuance of FS of a material subsequent event required disclosure, auditor may dual date the report for the disclosure of the event. Ayan, take note mo. Dual date the report for the disclosure of the event or date of the report as of the date of subsequent event and extend his or her procedures as required in the circumstances. Okay, it is not acceptable to label the note as unaudited or as not covered by the audit report. Okay, ulitin natin na baka nagkaroon ng confusion. 'Di ba? Merong ito yung FS mo. Iyan, iyan. Maraming pages. Siyempre, may date yung auditor's report. Okay? Ngayon, may subsequent event. No, let's say sa note 4 nga. Ano bang pwedeng note 4? Inventory na lang, halimbawa. Mayroong subsequent event na naka-apekto sa inventory which is nasa note 4. Okay. Yan. And kailangan ng disclosure niya no, sa notes to financial statements. Ayan. So yung audit report date mo dito, hindi niya na nasakop yung subsequent event na naka-apekto kay inventory. Kaya, bukod dito sa audit report date na yan, meron pa isang date dito na magpe-pertain kay note 4. Okay? Ayan. Ganon. Okay. Pero daw, sabi niyan, alternatively, the auditor may date the report as of the latter date o later date. So, pwede daw na, sige, palitan na lang natin yung buong date ng audit report. Ito, baguhin na natin to. Gawin na natin ito. Okay. Pero kasi, kapag ginawa mo yan, lalawak yung responsibility mo bilang auditor. Kasi, imbis na sa note 4 na lang yung subsequent event na yan, kabuuan na ng FS yung titingnan mo. Ayan, sabi dyan, no? Ayan. Extend his or her procedures as required in the circumstances. Okay, so bali yung dual reporting, ayan nga. The auditor limits his or her responsibility for subsequent events to the specific event referred to in the note lang. Okay, so ayun, yung dual dating. Next natin, reissued financial statements. When financial statements are reissued, events might have occurred subsequent to the original issuance of the financial statements that require disclosure in the reissued financial statements to keep them from being misleading. Events between release of original audit report and subsequent reissuance do not result in an adjustment to the financial statements unless events meet the criteria for the correction of an error. Okay, meron kasi tayong dalawang type ng subsequent events. Ito yung una, type 1. Ito yung isa, type 2. Okay, yung type 1 subsequent events are subsequent events that provide additional evidence with respect to conditions existing as of balance sheet date. Okay? Ibig sabihin na existing na as of balance sheet date, so let's say December 31, 2021, existing na yung condition nung date na to. Pero, subsequently lang, let's say January, hindi, masyadong early, no? Gawin nating mga March 28, ganyan. 2022, meron kang na-discover na new evidence. Okay? Yan. Subsequent events that provide additional evidence, dito yung evidence, with respect to conditions existing na as of December 31, 2021. So, yun yung type 1 subsequent event. Yung type 2 naman, subsequent events that provide evidence with respect to conditions arising subsequent to the balance sheet date. So, hindi pa existing as of balance sheet date. So, December 31, wala pa yan. Wala pa yung condition. Then, subsequently, doon lang nag-arise yung condition. Okay. So, yun yung dalawang types. And, ayan. Ano yung actions? Pag type 1, yung subsequent event. Subsequent events occurred after the original issuance and do not meet criteria for correction, do not result in adjustment of the reissued FS. However, they are disclosed. Okay, and yan nga, the reissued report is dual dated. Subsequent events that met the criteria for correction require adjustment and disclosure. Kapag type 2 naman, yung subsequent events requiring disclosure may be disclosed in separate note to the reissued FS. Reissued audit report would carry the same date used in the original audit report. Mm. Okay. Ayan. And then, ito na, last na section is ito, other reporting considerations. Ayan, nakasummarize naman dito, no, yung other reporting considerations. Ayan, sige, daanan natin ng konti. Pero self-explanatory naman yan. Ayan. Conditions, events, or situations. Yan. Offering securities to the public. Ayan. Consider legal and related requirements applicable to the auditor in all jurisdictions in which the securities are being offered. Access to other information. When considering other information included in the annual report, timely access is required. Need Auditor needs to make appropriate arrangements with the entity to obtain such information prior to the date of the report. Considerations of other information. Auditor has no specific responsibility to determine that other information is properly stated. Yan. Material inconsistencies. Auditor identify the material inconsistency. Yan. Determine whether the audited FS or the other information needs to be amended. Then, amendment is necessary in the FS and entity refuses to make amendments. Anong gagawin ni auditor? Express a qualified or adverse opinion. Okay. Amendment is necessary in other information and entity refuses. Consider including in the auditor's report an emphasis of matter paragraph describing the material inconsistency or taking other actions. Ito, material misstatements of facts. Auditor becomes aware that the other information appears to include material misstatement of fact discussed with management. Auditor considers that there is an apparent misstatement of fact, requests management to consult with a qualified third party. And auditor concludes that there is a material misstatement of fact in other information which management refuses to correct. Consider taking further appropriate action. Availability of other information after the date of auditor's report. All other information is not available to the auditor prior to the date of auditor's report. Gagawin, read other information at the earliest possible opportunity thereafter to identify material inconsistencies. Auditor identifies material inconsistency or becomes aware of an apparent material misstatement of fact. Determine whether FS need revision. Supplementary information presented with the financial statements. Not required by the applicable financial reporting framework, pero pinresent with audited FS, evaluate whether that supplementary information is clearly differentiated from the audited FS. Then yung supplementary information is not clearly differentiated from FS, ask management to change how an audited supplementary information is presented. So yung presentation lang naman yung ipapa-change ni auditor. Pero kapag nag-refuse si management to change how the unaudited supplementary info is presented, explain in the auditor's report that such information has not been audited. Okay. So kung magkaroon man siguro ng questions about dito, scenario lang, ganyan, sasabihin lang, management refuses to change supplementary information presented in the FS. What should the auditor do? Mga ganyan, Yan. Kaya familiarize mo rin yung self mo dito sa mga scenarios na yan. Basahin mo on your own. Okay. Then, ayan. Para dito sa part 2 ng auditor's report. Baka may question ka, unmute ka lang.